On today's episode of the Datatrek, we have Shailvi Wakhlu. She's the head of analytics at Komodo Health in San Francisco, and we're going to be discussing in data analytics industry, growing your analytics team, and career advice for women in data and analytics. Enjoy the show. Shailvi, thanks for joining. Do you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself?
Thanks for having me, Arash. So my name is Shailvi Wakhlu. As you mentioned, I work in a health tech startup. I'm the head of analytics at Komodo Health. My background is, I started off as an engineer and I switched into analytics many years ago, which was a great decision for me. And mostly I've worked in B2B enterprise SaaS companies, which is sort of my niche that I target. And I'm very excited to discuss more about this space because I'm pretty passionate about it.
That's great. If you're passionate about something, then you enjoy doing it, and hopefully that leads to good success. Yeah, I was, this entire industry has changed dramatically, and I think where it's going is always something interesting to discuss. So I guess in the analytics space, what do you see kind of happening in the future? Where do you see things and trends going?
Yeah, I definitely think that this is still a great space to be in. I think, the analytics space in general is a place that's growing. The number of companies that are looking for data to help them make decisions, to help them optimize things that they're already doing is constantly growing. And even as I've spent my last 5 years, I've spent a lot of time trying to find people who are good at that, and it's not easy. It's hard. So that leads me to believe that there's a lot of scope in this space of people who are passionate about things within this data space, bringing value to companies. So I just think there's a lot of plus and upside here.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think looking at analysts in the space, what do you think they need to do to stay relevant, to stay sharp? What do you think the skills are necessary for that to happen?
Yeah, I think, to begin with, obviously the technical skills are just non-negotiable. You have to be very good at grabbing, manipulating data, making sense of it, turning it into visualization, creating algorithms that actually make sense. So I think all of that is sort of just understood as a minimum requirement. But I think where people can really distinguish themselves in trying to stay relevant is by approaching that entire process in a very thoughtful way. So I think companies really benefit from people who approach that entire process as data partners, where they're trying to really figure out, like, how can I help solve a truly a business problem for the company. And I think that is something that really comes from practice, that comes from showing interest in what the problems is that you're trying to solve. And that's a good way to keep sharp.
Yeah, I think understanding the business side from all the different data leaders that we've spoken to, it becomes a very common thread. Like you must know that side of the house to understand really what you're doing. So I think the why behind what you're doing is important to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because right now I think there's a lot of places in the market where you can go to learn the skills about the scripting part, the querying part, and the visualizations. But I think that focus on the business is something that you tend to learn better in a real world scenario, where you actually have that outcome in mind, that whatever insights I give are actually going to change a decision that can make or break a company's future. I think that thoughtfulness is something that really takes effort to grow, and it's not easily taught in a classroom.
Do you feel like the analyst on your team, at least, or that you've managed in the past, how proactive are you to get them to go understand not just the business requirements from the stakeholders, but also understand kind of what their pain points are, what their job entails, what are their goals for the business, not just I need X from you to do what I need to do? How do you kind of navigate folks to go to that next level and finding out their counterparts and how they can better help them?
Yeah, I think that is something that I actively encourage. For my team, I have always highlighted that part of our job is to really lead with empathy and empathize very deeply with our eventual end customer. Like if you're in a SaaS business, usually it's users on some other side of the funnel, and what do they really need from us as a business, as a product, as a service that we are providing to them. And then internally we have internal customers who are our sort of our stakeholders, our partners, who have something specific that they're trying to optimize for. So I would have a very different approach if I was dealing with a product manager versus if I was dealing with a marketing manager, because I think both of them would have very different set of goals. They would have different ideas of what success looks like, of success of something, an insight that data is sharing with them. So I think it's very important for people to put themselves in their shoes and really build that trusted relationship where they know that any insight that you're giving them is really helping them maximize their goals.
Yeah, I think that's very key, is to be interested in what they're interested in, not just what you're interested in. If you're able to do that, then hopefully that leads to good success as a team collectively.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know you mentioned the team has gone through some goal setting exercises, and I think you mentioned the OKR,
Mm.
objective key results. So I think maybe kind of going through that, I know you kind of just implemented that. I was curious kind of what you had to do, and what are you seeing in having a lot more actionable goals, and kind of what's coming about from your team in that sense.
Yeah, so I think goal setting practices are really helpful for one, the individual. If they have clarity on what success for them really looks like, they're better able to work towards it because they have something clear that they're heading towards. And I think the business also benefits because in some ways you have those conversations pretty early about what you are trying to achieve. So to allude to one of the things that we were talking about earlier, you know data scientists or analysts, they can have their own goals of what is exciting for them to do, but sometimes what is exciting for them to do may not necessarily fulfill a specific business, a business goal. So it is helpful to have that as an explicit conversation, which says, here's what I'm good at, here are the skills that I'm trying to grow on, but I want to do it within the boundaries of something that the business benefits from as well. Because if I spend all my time coming up with some really cool algorithm that optimizes something that's 0.1% of the business, it's not really impactful. And so I think that process in general, we started doing it more as an explicit as an explicit thing that we kind of sit down and do at the beginning of the quarter. And I think it's been really helpful because part of it, the benefit for me as a manager, is also that I really understand what my what my reports are looking to grow on, and that makes it easier for me to align the right opportunities for them, which again still benefit the business in some way.
Yeah, and I think in that relationship between manager and employee, I think people, they steer away from asking, what do you want out of this job? I think for people, especially at startups where you want to be embodied in the product or their service, for some people it's still a job. And so I think understanding what they're trying to, one, get out of the job, and also what they're looking to do from just a personal perspective or growth perspective, I think that then allows you also to kind of know in your mind, this might be somebody that's not going to last or stay with us for 5 years. It might be somebody that I'm going to get a year or two out of, and I'm going to maximize those 2 years, and then they're going to move on. So I think those discussions will allow managers to also kind of be able to gauge a little bit better some of those nuances.
That's a great point, because I also feel that just because somebody isn't planning to be with you for 5 years doesn't mean they don't have anything to add, and that you don't have anything to add for them. I think those explicit conversations do help in that sort of mutually beneficial relationship. Like how do you get the best out of someone and make sure that you're also helping them meet their goals, their personal goals.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I was curious, when looking at data analysts coming through from a resume perspective. In
Mm.
your opinion, are there any things that you've seen that you tend to look for in those resumes that kind of stand out, or what suggestions do you have for anybody out there that's trying to improve how they present themselves, at least on paper?
Yeah, resumes, again, they're the first sort of thing that I see for any potential candidate. So I do think that it's important. Typically, of course, there's some minimum technical skills and experience that I'm looking for within the context of whatever the role I'm hiring for. So for example, at Komodo Health versus Salesforce, there's slightly different experiences that would speak to me. Like at Komodo Health, I would or towards somebody who maybe has some healthcare experience. That would be beneficial.
Sure.
But beyond those things which are very role specific, I think generally as an analyst, the part that I'm looking for is that crisp storytelling where they are able to explain their projects in a concise manner that highlights, here's what I was trying to do and here is what I accomplished. Because I think that's a big part of this job. And people who already start on the right foot with their resume, that's something that's meaningful for me.
Yeah, that's the first data points you're seeing of somebody. So if they can articulate it and in a good way, obviously there's no visual images and charts, but if they can at least in words articulate it more concisely and put it in a better word, then sounds like they're already be off on the right foot, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, interesting. I guess when you shift from resume review and now you're in interviews, do you have any tips of like maybe do's and don'ts that you'd like people to see doing and people less doing?
Yeah, I guess from the resume to the actual interviewing, I think one thing to keep in mind is that your resume should be representative of what you are truly good at and what you want to highlight. So when you come to the actual interview stage, if there are clear gaps that you seem confused about in relation to your resume, that's a very simple one to avoid. Like your resume should be accurate. But I think when you actually come to the interview stage, one thing is, especially for coding interviews, I think the industry, like especially right now during coronavirus, I think a lot of these things are held online, and people are not doing in-person whiteboarding anymore. So there might be quite a few different dynamics in how the interviewer might sort of help you during the interview or what they're looking for. It's just a little natural to be slightly more focused on syntax, unfortunately, when you're when you're interviewing somebody online. And in general, I have my own thoughts about like how much you should care about syntax during an interview. There are pros and cons, but I still think you should already acknowledge that this is the reality for now and prepare for it going forward. Ask, if you have any confusion, ask them about the tech stack that they will specifically be interviewing you on. Make sure to brush up on just like basic things so that you don't make silly mistakes. But also during the interview, feel free to point out that whether if you're writing in pseudocode, point that out so that the interview is not thrown off in something different that they're expecting. And then from the behavioral side, I would say that one of the most common things that I see is that people tend to veer off into giving too much context about their background and their current org structure and the setting and the it's all great. I mean, I'd love to hear more about each person, but the aim of that interview is to keep the conversation focused on yourself. So anytime you're giving that extra context about your current situation, like really draw back that conversation. That is this extra context positively adding to my story and to how I am coming across? If it's not, then it's just extra noise. You can do away with it. Like you'd rather have the interviewer focus on your skills and your accomplishments. So I think that's a good thing to just keep in mind.
So it sounds like less is more, and the more you're prepared, the better chance you have at success, which I think is very fundamental, basic advice, but usually basic things still hold true. So keep
Absolutely.
it short, keep it simple, and be prepared. So I think that's great. Now I guess we can get into what you're very passionate about, which is women in data and analytics and diversity. And I know you've done some different meetup conversations and posted some different things on LinkedIn and YouTube. So in that world, I think the influence of diversity in any industry adds tremendous value. I think different eyes, different ears provide a lot of different insights, especially when you're looking at data and trying to figure out how to apply that to the business side of things. So I guess in that sense, one thing that you had mentioned that I think is really important to touch on is this whole notion of I go into a resume, I have to present myself on paper, then I have to present myself in person. So you're constantly selling yourself at every stage. And I think a place where people maybe don't necessarily keep in mind that they need to sell themselves is, when they're looking to get a promotion or a raise. So I know you have a lot of thoughts on what women can do to help themselves in those scenarios. So if you could jump into kind of what your philosophy is and advice, I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a recurring sort of topic for me, which I'm super excited to share my thoughts on. It's something that I myself struggled with early on in my career, because I think, you know good advice is good advice for anybody, but I think how to use that good advice can sometimes be different for men and women. And so, within the constraints of how do I get a promotion and how do I get a raise, usually the advice that's shared is, do good work, make sure your boss knows about it, and make sure you're on the same page. But I think for women, at least not all women, but there are enough for whom this is a problem, is that societally there's not that very comfortable space where you are used to talking about your achievements, because in most cases, sometimes it's just something they feel themselves, sometimes it's something that society kind of dings them on. But just this whole perception of, women who are seen as bragging or showing off is a negative thing. And a lot of women I encountered, and myself included, tended to overcorrect on the other side, where it was like, well, I'll just do great work and someone will eventually notice and someone will reward me for it. Unfortunately, that is not how the corporate world works. Selling yourself, as you correctly pointed out, is very much a part of the game. So my aim is to sort of give people something actionable that makes them comfortable and confident in doing it. So for me, the first thing is, let me at least on a weekly basis write stuff down so that I'm recording my own accomplishments. And then it doesn't seem like such a big gap to talk about it when a promotion or raise conversation happens, because you're already pretty aware of what other things that you're doing well. And it allows you that space to sort of reflect on your achievements and phrase them in a way that's comfortable for you, and put your own voice behind it. So I think that just comfort building, knowing that it's supremely important for your career that you do it,
So are you
is.
creating a log there? Like, are you kind of just maybe simplistically in Excel, just, today or, at the end of the week, looking back at, successful things you've done and just noting that? Is that kind of what you advise?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually typically just do it in Google Docs. Like, I just have sort of a running thread of, my weekly, like at least once a week I try to note down the achievements. And then at every, say maybe once a month, or sometimes at least once a quarter, I'll go back and actually bucket those things. That, like, for example, this was something technically that I did which was great. This was an example of something from a leadership side which I did which was beneficial to the business. So I think those type of things also help me stay anchored, because I already know what the company is rewarding in terms of promotions. And if all the great things I'm doing are, in documentation, then I know nobody's going to care about it at the end of the cycle. So I think that exercise just kind of helps you be a little more structured with the process.
Yeah, and it sounds like for anybody, keeping tabs on what you're doing that you feel like is successful will also enable you to have a better conversation with your manager, explaining, these are the things I've done this past week or this month. In your opinion, do you feel like those are accomplishments too? Because maybe they feel like, no, that's just part of the job. You think you've done something fantastic, but in honesty, like, no, that's just, what you're supposed to do, or that's the level of expectation we have. So I think from a career personal growth potential, that adds tremendous value. I think you can develop better habits knowing what you've done, and then also having some talking points if you do want to use those to set up for a promotion or a raise or something like that. But I think if you're always looking to grow, you have to have a baseline or a measuring stick. And I think people think they just kind of collect it in their head, but when you write it down, you see it, and then you can share it with somebody a lot easier. And I think, to your point, that kind of fosters a much better conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you you said it really well, that ultimately you and your manager have to both think that it's an achievement. It's not a one-way street. And I have this conversation with with men and women on my team all the time, where they're very surprised that I don't feel the same way about their achievements. And it's helpful if I hear from them the examples that they're thinking of, because then I can actually course correct and say, here's additionally what it would take to really make a very compelling case for you.
So yeah, so I know you wrote a really good LinkedIn post, and you have a kind of 3-step process when it comes to, and I know step one is kind of that awareness. So maybe you can just talk to us about what people need to be aware of going into a job, or when they're in a job, just in the sense of, promotions, how that works, raises, things like that.
Yeah, so for me, the article that you're referring to is, it was anchored around promotions, but again, it's still relevant when you're considering a new job, and seeing, especially if you're a person who wants to progress. In startups, a lot of people join startups with the hopes that it can really help them grow in their career. So some of these things start with just the awareness step, that make sure you understand what that actually looks like. If you're expecting that I'll take this job or I'll join this team, and within a year, if I do really well, they'll promote me, or at least there's that hope that they might. And then it turns out that the company has a policy that you have to be in a role for at least 2 years before you're ever considered for a promotion. Like, that is something that's easy to ask. That's something that's easy to just verify, that those expectations are aligned on both sides. Because I see a lot of folks who take jobs that they still kind of feel that they were under leveled a little bit, and they hope that they'll do good work and go on to the next level. But if that's not going to happen, or if that's not going to happen realistically on your time frame, then it's something that you can benefit from knowing early on.
Yeah, and I think the expectation to reality, that difference is usually either your happiness or your sadness. So knowing where the expectations are from both parties, I think just helps you kind of stay even keeled, and have a better understanding of what's happening. So I think that's a great first step. I know the second step, we kind of maybe went a little bit out of order, is you mentioned documenting your growth. So I think that goes back to the point you made earlier. Write
Yeah.
down your accomplishments and make sure. And I think something else maybe that would be interesting for you to talk to step in there is kind of the impact factor of what you're doing. Because I think people get caught up in just saying, I did this, I ran this report, we created this, and then it's, but what was the impact? So I
Yeah.
think maybe adding a little bit more kind of details into that step would be great for people to know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, at the end of the day, you have to remember that companies are here to make money, and they have to see sort of that clear ROI of, when I gave this person this much responsibility, here is how much sort of extra work that they ended up. And extra, I don't mean just extra hours, just, impact above their level, that, why shouldn't they be a senior analyst when they're already doing the work that I expect from other senior analysts? So being able to parse through all of the things that you've done and really pull out, like, here is what really benefited the business by me doing it. You're basically making that case that you should want me to keep doing this, and you should want me to feel happy to keep doing this. And that's essentially the case that you're trying to make.
Yeah, I think I'm quoting you. I think you said only visible work is appreciated. So I think it's out of sight, out of mind. I think this kind of comes into play here. So I think the other thing that you'd mentioned is um, kind of making sure your peers, the performance review aspect of that. I think when you go into those conversations, I mean, what's your suggestions to people? I guess, you kind of have a list of things that you've done well. Um, Now you're going into a potential, kind of one-on-one or a meeting. How do you have that conversation? It's not always the easiest conversation, or, hey, can I have your minute? And it's like, what does this person want? How do you propose having that conversation?
Yeah, I think my sort of sneaky trick is actually not to make it one conversation, but almost a series of conversations. It is a lot easier for your manager to already know that you're looking for something, rather than this just one fine bright shiny day you show up and you say, where's my promotion? So I think part of the whole documenting your wins and sharing it is that you already get accustomed to doing that level setting. Like if your boss is not giving you very clear directions, start sharing out things that you think are achievements and sort of level setting with that. Like just ask them that, do you think I'm on the right track? Is there something that I need to do differently? And that hopefully takes you to your eventual conversation when it's sort of the right time, where you can say that, I think I'll soon be ready for the next level. Do you have any suggestions on, do you think that I'm ready as well? Or if not, what would be the gaps that I need to fulfill in order to make it to that next step? So I think, if you've already started building up to that conversation, that whole process becomes a lot cleaner. And, also your boss just being aware of what you do is really helpful, because then you don't have to document every single project you've done ever. Like they already know
Right.
what problems you encountered, how you solved them, and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that also then fosters the potential feedback loop. I think
Yep.
when you are proactive in being accountable for your work, I think as a manager, at least this is the case for myself too. I feel like then you want that employee to be more successful because you see them really caring about what they're doing and they want to get that feedback. And then you have other folks that just maybe feel a little bit more entitled. Well, you should know, like, can't you tell I've done all this work? Like, I'm working really hard. Obviously, yes. But I think when you see that documentation, you see the conversations, you get that better communication loop, then the final part of that is that feedback from you as a manager back to the employee to say, well, XYZ, or I think you need to work on this or that or the other. And I think then that full loop really puts you at a better position. No.
Yep, and anything you can do to make your manager's job easier, I think is generally a good thing to do, anyways. So yeah, showing that own level of ownership, that you're taking ownership of your own career, figuring out what you need to do and where you still have something to learn. I think it goes a long way, and in getting to the right outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think on that same kind of conversation topic, I think they kind of hand in hand going together. I guess, what advice would you have for women to talk about their achievements? I know you have the humble brag, which I think is quite funny, but it's also quite true. I think people don't like folks that are arrogant about their own accomplishments, but at some point you have to, sell yourself and make sure you are kind of patting yourself on the back just lightly enough. So what advice do you have when women need to present their achievements in that department?
Yeah. So my sort of very basic sort of two-step advice is, one, first, just reframe your mental narrative. Like just get comfortable doing it. Like, one common example is that instead of thinking of it as, oh, people will think I'm bragging, or maybe they'll get jealous, maybe they'll get upset with me or tease me. Instead of that, think that, hey, I'm actually just trying to improve the sharing in the world, that I'm trying to share my wins, my failures, what I learned from it. Like, I think that is a good goal for people to have, to try to improve the shared knowledge that people have. And if you don't share your wins, then how is that going to happen? So there's a couple of things I've put them on my website as well, but there's a couple of very common mental narratives that I feel, it's helpful to reframe them. And then the second step is just the external narrative, like, focus on your authentic experience, and really hone in on what you were trying to do, why it was important, why you did it well, but more importantly, what did you learn from it that that really can actually benefit other folks. And I think that is something that takes practice. And if the only reason you're not talking about your achievements is because you're afraid that it'll come across as you bragging, it's fine to just go far on the other side and tweak it back until you get to the right words. But I do think with practice you can find your authentic voice that highlights something that you care about highlighting, but also does it in a way that's comfortable for you.
Yeah, I think too, when you present any type of information, just looking at the faces of people and their reactions does tell you a lot. So I think it's a very simple trick that a lot of people, especially like in boardroom settings for executives or whatnot, it's a tough thing to do personally as you're
Yeah.
kind of speaking about yourself. But if you have like a confidant, a friend, somebody, you can always maybe ask them, hey, can you take a peek? Like if, I said XYZ, did you see anybody's reaction? So that intel, I think, also kind of lets you understand how what you're saying is sitting in people's minds. And then the other thing I was going to ask is, I think it's great to share your successes. I do think it's also very important to share not losses, but things that you could improve or did differently. I think both sides then kind of give you less of a, I'm trying to brag. It's like, look, I'm here to share, and in sharing you learn a lot from failures. So do you think kind of sometimes speaking up on both ends would help somebody kind of maybe not feel as much as they're bragging all the time about their achievements?
Yeah, I in fact, I almost think that I almost think that it should be a requirement for you to also share your sort of, something that was not a win, like something that was a partial failure, because that also at the end of the day normalizes failing. Because if people have that expectation that I'm expected to only have wins all the time, then you don't actually create a culture where people are comfortable with something that doesn't actually go according to plan. And I mean, as an engineer, as an analyst, there are going to be plenty of things that do not go according to plan. So I think if you normalize talking about them, you create that trusted environment where people have that psychological safety of learning from something and seeking help if they're not able to complete something. And you're right, if it also makes it easier for you to share your wins because you also share your losses, then that whole process, I think, is again beneficial for everyone. And it can also be a good opportunity for collaboration, because maybe you don't have the answer to something, but other people could potentially help you, and that's again a nice thing to get out of it.
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with that. I was going to ask, I know you believe, diversity, especially in the analytics space, can really help a team. From your experience, what's your opinion on that? I'd like you to share kind of what you feel like that diversity adds to the end result of your team being more successful.
Yeah. So I, especially in the context of data, I feel it's even more important, because I think data teams that inherently don't have diversity of experiences and thought and opinions are going to have certain blind spots that they, I mean, our job is to create hypotheses and test them and really try to find the truth in the data. But an experience that you don't have, it's harder to come up with that hypothesis that is just, it's just out of your vision. So yeah, I think companies really will stand to gain a lot by having that diverse perspective because otherwise there might be some questions that they're just not asking. And I think, again, as analysts, our real job is, I mean, people think it's about finding the answers, but it's really also about just making sure that the right questions are being asked and the right sort of investigations are being prioritized. So I really think that companies should focus on making sure that they have a team that is representative of at least, at the very minimum, of whoever your users are going to be, because otherwise you might miss out on something that's very, very crucial.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. If your audience is comprised of a certain group of people, or
Yeah.
you're hoping to penetrate a certain market, then having that viewpoint and insight in-house, advising on, no, I think you need to look at this, your different perspective. I think that's without a doubt very critical to being successful. Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I know overall. You like to be happy in your work, in your personal life, and I know kind of EQ is a big thing for you. So I just wanted you to touch on kind of your thoughts when it comes to managing everything that's going on in life. I always think it's important to like what you do. Hopefully you love it. If you do, then you've definitely been done a lot of good things. But what do you do to just kind of put it all together and make sense of it?
Yeah, I like to say that I prioritize happiness and that I don't just pursue it. It's something that I'm very actively and intentionally trying to bring to the forefront in my life. And how it seems to play out is in my decision making. That anytime I'm faced with a decision, I am trying to evaluate that, long term, does this affect my happiness positively or negatively, and also short term, does it affect my happiness and sort of sense of well-being in a positive or negative way. And I think it is important to sort of hone in on that, because I don't want to take a decision that just seems awesome for today, but it's going to have long-term consequences that I don't enjoy, that will really sort of pull me down. And yeah, the one other thing that I'd like to add is to just spend a lot of time. I try to spend a lot of time in my life just expressing gratitude. I think it's very important to sort of remind the universe that here's what you care about, and then also acknowledge the people around you who help you with stuff that, even in the middle of a COVID situation, like, I'm sure there's things that are still going well, that are still actually joyful. So putting our mental frame, like putting our mind in that framework of, there are things that I'm grateful about in my life, I think puts us in a very positive space, and that, at least I hope that it helps us seek out more of those positive interactions.
Yeah, no, I thought it's an interesting perspective you have, and I wanted to share that because I know through this pandemic and just life in general, people have up and downs, and I think it's good to have the right mindset, and I think that's a very easy and simple way to think about it. Having gratitude and being thankful for what you have and not what you don't have is always a good way. And I'm a big Gary Vaynerchuk fan, and he's always preaching micro speed, macro patience. So I think in life, if you're going for a promotion, if you're trying to advance your career, be cognizant of what you're doing on a day-to-day has a lot of value, but then be patient on the big picture. So
Yep.
awesome. It's been a pleasure. If people want to get in touch, what's the best way, Shailvi, for them to touch base with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter, and they can find me. Shailvi W is my name, and yeah, so Twitter is a great place for people.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. It's SHAILVIW. So if you're on Twitter and you're seeking some advice, feel free to reach out. For everybody that's listening, thanks. We'll see you on the next episode. And Shailvi, thanks again. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much, Arash. This was fun. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.